How can the world, how can Israel and the Palestinians overcome this whole situation? Is there a way out of this, as we discussed earlier, vicious cycle?
Well, I think there is a way out of it. I think it's unlikely that the current Israeli leadership and the current Israeli public will support my my what I suggest is the way to solve it. I think the Israeli government needs to embrace the Palestinian unity government between Hamas and the Fatah. This unity government is very moderate. It's filled with technocrats, not people who are Hamas members. And it needs to start seriously negotiating with this government. No more negotiations about negotiations. No more negotiations about preconditions for negotiations. Enough. Seriously negotiating the parameters of the way this conflict needs to end are pretty clear. It's the way most of the world understands that this is how it's supposed to end. The two-state solution, two countries living side by side with trade, free passage from the West Bank to Gaza. All of this, of course, needs to be done gradually to ensure safety of Israelis. Obviously, Hamas is a strong organization with thousands of fighters and rockets. It needs to be disarmed. It needs to be integrated into a Palestinian military. At the same time, settlements need to be dismantled. And in the end, we'll reach a situation when we are finally living in peace. There's no other way to solve the problem of security and terrorism other than by reaching a political compromise. There's just no other way. I know no other case in history where you oppress the people and oppress them and oppress and oppress them enough so that they keep silent, so that they give up their desire to be free, their desire to have their own country, their desire to enjoy what life offers to other humans. Palestinians are just as entitled as Israelis to freedom and to be able to work and to be able to pursue their passions and their talents. And this is so twisted that we are keeping an entire nation under military rule and under siege. And there's no way to end this. At no point will Palestinians say, okay, we give up, just stop killing us. We will be peaceful now. No, the only way is to negotiate and end this occupation. And I believe that then we can start really integrating Israel into this region. We are behaving as if we're a part of Europe, but we're not. We're surrounded by Arabs who hate us. And some of this hatred is because of anti-Semitism, but some of it is because we are the only democratic nation that maintains military rule over an entire nation. We're the only nation that launches military operations every 2 years and kills thousands of civilians. People have had enough with Israel, and it's very clear that if Israel doesn't pursue this path, the world opinion will not allow Israel to continue this way. I really hope that more international pressure will be brought on the Israeli government to end this gross human rights violation.
What do you think of a binational state, like with two nations under one roof?
I think it's very unrealistic for the short term.
The show is called Young and Naive, so let's be naive.
The ideal world, in my view, is a world without borders. But I think that it's completely impossible to. I don't think we will achieve that in my lifetime. I think that right now we have generations of Israelis and Palestinians who were...
He's really going at it now.
Yeah. Generations of Israelis and Palestinians who were brought up to hate each other, and people who know nothing except fighting each other and killing each other. I think now the realistic and the best way to avoid civil war is a two-state solution. In time, of course, I don't want to see borders. I want to see kind of humanity uniting, but I don't think that it's realistic in the short term. I think, you know, the way Europe went through so many wars and so much useless bloodshed and really it had to go through the worst war, worst crime in humanity to really understand, wow, war is horrible. We just exterminated 6 million people. Let's stop with these wars. I hope it won't come to this here, but I think Israelis and Palestinians and this region in general, people still feel that military solutions are a viable solution. And until this is no longer the mentality, it's really unsafe to keep both populations together.
So, you know, we are a German TV show. What role could Germany, the German government, play in this conflict?
Well, I think Germany is a very, very important actor. I think it is second in its importance only to the United States. Germany has a very, very strong economy. It trades with Israel, and it's a very, very important member of the European Union. I think any steps by the German government to condemn Israel, to threaten it with, I'm not saying right away, sanction Israel, embargo it, let people, you know, starve in the streets. At first you can start with condemnation, with diplomatic measures. If it doesn't work, we can move on to other steps. I think the German government, because of our history with the German people, I understand that it results in kind of a almost automatic German backing for Israel. I understand the guilt. I think you should feel guilty. But at some point, you also need to understand that Jews can also be other than victims. And in this equation between Israel and Palestine, Jews are not the victims. The victims are the Palestinians who are deprived of their rights.
I mean, you mentioned the guilt the German government feels, and that's why they maybe shy away from more like action that you think is necessary. Maybe what can Europe do, or the EU do?
Well, I think the EU, first of all, in the EU, it's definitely the general attitude of the EU is more critical of Israel than the German attitude is, because the rest of Europe doesn't feel as guilty. And I think the EU, for example, the fact that the EU forced Israel into agreeing not to funnel any funds from the Horizon 2020 project, which is about academic cooperation, promised not to provide any of that funding to settlements or to academic establishments in the settlements. I think it's a good step. It shows that whenever you combine your opposition to the occupation with money, it works. And the EU is the main trading partner with Israel. The EU has a great deal of power in that sense, and I think the first step, and I'm saying this even though it's now officially illegal to do so in Israel.
What?
Well, in Israel, if you call for boycotting Israeli goods, it is illegal, but you can be sued for it by anyone, and that person doesn't need to prove damages to sue you. So, but I think that the first step, absolutely first step, is boycotting settlement goods. Those are goods that are produced on Palestinian land by exploited laborers, most of them Palestinians. No one should be buying from firms that that are making money off of oppression. This is the first step. I think people don't realize how much Israel depends on the international community, on the EU, on the US, for maintaining its legitimacy, for maintaining its power, for maintaining its economy. I think even such small steps can work. If they don't work, of course, there are more steps that can be taken and should be taken. But I think right now, the general trend needs to be escalated. Israel needs to understand that there is a price to pay for its actions. The Palestinians and people who support them cannot stand by, and this injustice needs to be brought to an end. And I myself, as an Israeli activist, I try to change Israeli society from within so that people understand that what is happening is wrong. But it's very, very difficult because the forces that are working against us are much more powerful than we are. They have most of the media, they have government, access to the media, they have the educational system, which produces children who are very militaristic and nationalistic. We are dealing with forces that are much stronger than we are. And that's why we, and most of all Palestinians, need international help that would make Israel finally pay the price for what it is doing.
Look at the kids around us. I mean, they're a couple years old. You mentioned that there seems to be a war every 1 or 2 years now. I mean, they constantly grow up with war now. What does it do to children, or to when they grow up later? Do you know?
I think it's definitely unhealthy. The Israeli public significantly shifted to the right when the second Intifada started, when there were terrorist attacks, there were suicide bombings, every week, and dozens of innocent people were killed in those attacks. The Israeli public really believed that there's no point in negotiating with Palestinians. And this is a generation that still did see negotiations, that did see kind of positive steps from the Palestinians. The current generation that is growing up with wars every 2 years will be more militaristic and more nationalistic unless something changes.
And finally, since we were talking about Germany and Europe, we also have many viewers in America. What can America do? Or Americans, or American politicians?
Well, first of all, when we talk about international opinion, the only thing that matters to Israelis and almost everything that matters to Israeli politicians is what the U.S. does.
Why?
Because the U.S. is the country that is providing us diplomatic backing in the United Nations Security Council. It's the country that is supplying us with weapons and with military aid, billions every year. Americans, I hope, will understand that the fact that they are not, the fact that most of the American public is not interested in foreign policy means that foreign policy in the United States is very influenced by small groups. Those small groups are not just the AIPAC, Jewish lobby, as some people think. A lot of it is religious groups, Baptists, evangelicals. People think that all the Jews need to come to the land of Israel for Jesus to return. It's not, foreign policy should not be influenced by matters like these.
Like foreign policy based on religion.
Yeah, it is. There's no doubt about that. American foreign policy towards Israel was influenced by religion from way before Israel was established. And I think that Americans need to understand that getting involved will actually matter because you're in a country that has great influence over Israel. Getting your congresspeople, getting the administration to feel that the foreign policy that they're pursuing vis-a-vis Israel has a price, that not all Americans back Israel, that people are critical of what's happening here. I think it can cause can lead to really significant difference. And I hope that the Americans who watch this feel that they should be doing something to change that, because really you have a lot of power in your hands.
I mean, when there are negotiations, like final thing, when there are negotiations, and there's usually like a impartial guy in the middle, like a mediator.
Yeah.
Who can that be? I mean, obviously, I guess not America, since they're backing one side. Obviously, not Germany, because we're back one side.
Yeah.
What actor, what country, what government can that be?
Well, I think the problem is that right now in the international community, everyone feels that everyone is picking sides and no one is fair. I think that, first of all, the EU is a much more balanced party than the United States. Unfortunately, because it is perceived by the Israeli government as pro-Palestinian, Israel is not letting the EU gain any influence in terms of the negotiations. Israel is very happy to receive money from the EU. It's very happy to trade with European countries. It doesn't want EU to meddle in human rights issues in Israel, not just the occupation. There are many human rights violations in Israel. So I think the EU, because of its economic power, can use that to link to greater influence in terms of the negotiations, because it will never come, Israel will never agree to that willingly. Also, it's not a given that the American government needs to be pro-Israel. It can be more balanced. And I hope we see it already in polls in the United States, for example. The Americans who are young and are non-white, which are both growing populations in the United States, tend to be much more critical of Israel than the older generation and whites. And I hope that the America's foreign policy, America's backing of Israel will change and will become more kind of not just a loyal ally, not just a subservient ally, but an actual ally who cares about Israel and wants to see it prosper. And sometimes that means getting serious, tough love. And we're not seeing any of that from the American government. We're seeing kind of groveling and apologies, and on the other hand, we're seeing the Israeli government saying very harsh things about the US and about their involvement in getting the ceasefire. And it's really kind of pathetic when you have a country of 8 million chastising the United States government, the most powerful government in the world.
So less soft hate, more tough love.
Yeah, I definitely think that tough love, this is what Israel needs. I mean, it's bad for Israelis. We're seeing the occupation seep into Israel. We're seeing restrictions on freedom of speech. For example, last night, Jesus. For example, last night we had a protest here against the war, and police simply prevented it from happening. They decided that the protest is illegal, even though nothing about the protest was illegal. We're seeing right-wingers attacking Israelis. We're seeing members of Knesset saying that all Israeli Arab businesses that participated in the kind of day of strike for Palestinians in Gaza need to be boycotted. We're seeing a lot of hate, a lot of intolerance, and this is because the mentality of the occupation, that we are under siege, that we are under threat, that we are constantly at war, is entering into Israeli society and is really corroding the foundations of Israel. Israel was meant to be a Jewish and a democratic state, and it's becoming much more Jewish and much less democratic with each passing day.
Elizabeth, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was longer than expected, but
Sure, it was a pleasure. Thank you so
thank you
much.
very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.